Buñuel once wrote Evita, where he was trying to present himself to Hollywood and to say, I can do this kind of film, I can do this primitive man kind of film, or I can do this other kind of film, which is more of a psychopathology. And that's the category of Belle de Jour. It's a little bit like a case study of an individual person, a case study. He'd done neuroses, he'd done psychoses, and in this case, he's doing a woman who is probably a masochist.
She's a woman with what I would call tremendous cognitive dissonance, which is she doesn't own what she's really doing and feeling. She has this one beautiful, pacific, serene, upper-class life that has to be just so. She doesn't have a lot of empathy for people who don't fit into it. But when she is doing her secret Severine side, oh, well, then every indulgence is hers, and it doesn't matter how perverse it is. She cannot reconcile the two. She's a total wimp about it.
C'est l'autre que tu aimes. Pourquoi viens-tu ici, alors?
Je ne sais pas. Ce sont deux choses bien distinctes.
You can tell that Deneuve is a very proper, strict young girl and that she was raised that way. But the problem is that she had this moment of molestation in her past, which actually opened up a door to a forbidden pleasure, a pleasure that was probably all the more sweet because it was forbidden. And what she has to do, in her marriage she's frustrated, is discover a way to open up her pleasures, and that happens to be the masochistic route towards abandoning oneself to the control of another.
When young women are raised under a covenant that says that they must refuse sex and push away sex in order to retain their value, that they have no value if they are loose sexually, the cathartic, exciting thing becomes, I must say no to sex, but then secretly give in to it. You know, no, 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 yes, 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 push, pull, push, pull.
It all becomes a little more confusing with the female masochist. One reason it becomes confusing is because it's kind of the normal position for a woman to be in, which is to submit to the power of a man. Now, in a so-called post-feminist era, we can see that, of course, we're beyond that. But psychically and phantasmatically, are we beyond that? Maybe not. The female masochist can't call the shots in the same way. Or maybe she can, but Severine can't. Severine wouldn't know how to play the game and how to make people humiliate her. The world just doesn't work that way, that women go and pay to be humiliated. Why would they do that when they can get that in their regular life? But there is something going on in which Severine does want to exercise some power over her pleasure. And one of the ways she does that is to fantasize, and the other way she does that is to try to control it with the business in the brothel.
Ne me touche pas! Si tu recommences, je m'en vais. Et tu ne me reverras plus.
You see this with Severine, and I see it with other young women all the time. As they become sexually experienced, their fantasy world enlarges. They have more confidence. They get a sense of humor about this rape fantasy, the forced sex. After all, a forced sex fantasy is the complete opposite of a sexual assault. You get as scared as you want to be. You get pushed just as far as you want to be. You come exactly when you want to have an orgasm. The whole thing is over. You are never made to do anything you don't want to do, which is the opposite of an assault.
The question of morality in masochism is itself very interesting. The masochist, especially the female masochist, needs to, can't just say, I want this pleasure. Severine can't say, I want this pleasure. She doesn't even quite know what it is. She pursues pleasure through other people's forcing it upon her. And that way she begins to discover what she likes. But it's very important for her to continue to play the role of the good girl who doesn't know what she wants and who is compelled to have pleasure that she otherwise wouldn't know about. If you're a good girl, you don't seek sex. And if you seek sex in the conventional way of looking at it, you will be punished.
Non, je t'en prie.
Repose-toi. Bonsoir.
When this film came out, there was very little understood or talked about around the subject of child abuse. The notion was that these boogeymen, these weird strangers, sometimes picked up a child, offered them candy from a car, and then spirited them away and did something terrible to them.
We are given this seduction, molestation of Séverine as a very young girl in the Kessel, and Buñuel uses it. What Buñuel invents on top of that is the scene in which Séverine refuses to take the host in her in a mass. So at that point, she clearly thinks of herself as somebody who has been sullied and who does not deserve to take the body of Christ into her own. And so that's part of her separation of good and bad.
I think that's both a contemporary and also a genuinely honest way of understanding how she comes to be who she is, this tremendous disconnect from reality that she has, where she can't bring things together as a whole, because when you're a kid and you're being abused, you're then supposed to pretend like it didn't happen.
Molestation is there as, I think, a cause, some kind of primal cause in her being that seems to want to repeat. It's a repetition compulsion. She has to go to the brothel. She goes, in a sense, under her own power. She's drawn to the brothel as the place where she knows, it's a dirty place, she will find some kind of encounter with that earlier memory. As soon as she's in that space, first thing she does is let her hair down. Literally let her hair down. And then Monsieur Adolphe gives her what she basically was seeking. And even before that, Anaïs understands that is what she's seeking and says, oh, well, you need la baguette. You need a firm hand. And Adolphe understands the same thing.
Là. Voilà. C'est mieux ça. Alors, c'est la manière forte qu'il te faut?
Who's the masochist in the film? Oh, it's the beautiful blonde, of course. The director himself may be the one who's the real masochist, but who's the figure who's going to portray the masochist? The woman. Who is the cuckold? The husband who looks like a Ken doll. Everybody is a certain kind of type. And as erotic films got bolder and more outrageous and more politically defiant as the years went by, when we started to see self-titled feminist erotic movies, you started to see these things broken.
When I have all of Belle de Jour in front of me, I can sort of see how this fantasy influences that fantasy and how things are coming out of reality and in a way how Séverine is beginning to grasp what this mysterious thing called sexuality is.
No one's ever going to accuse Buñuel of being a feminist. No one's ever going to say, ah, yes, the great feminist film Belle de Jour. And yet it is a movie of great interest to feminists who study imagery and sexuality. It always has been and always will, because you have a female protagonist whose sexuality is at the center of the movie. And in fact, she gets to live out all kinds of outrageous behavior. She breaks every rule that she's been brought up with, and at the end, she doesn't get punished for it. That's really the best part of all. She seems to have gotten away with murder, only in the case of a woman's life, she has gotten away with sexual pleasure, which is, that's like murder, isn't it? There's some people who think it's just as bad. What feminist views of the movie are, on the contrary side, are that she is not an actualized feminist. She doesn't come into her own and say, wow, you know what? I'm a masochist and proud. That would be like very post-gay lib of her. She doesn't, call up everybody she knows and says, I'm a bottom and where's the next play party?
Well, way back in 2002, I put Belle de Jour on my top 10 list of films for Sight and Sound. I think I put the film on my list because when I first saw it, it absolutely confounded me. I knew it was sexy in some way that I probably didn't have a right to know or to understand. It was absolutely compelling and disturbing and truly confusing and surreal. And I knew a little bit about what surrealism was. And I think what I discovered in that film best of all the Buñuel films, was how it was possible to be surrealist in a new and more subtle and I think you might even say insidious way. Surrealism was founded by André Breton, and he was a poet and I guess you could say a surrealist novelist of some sort. And in order to write in a new way, he discovered the cultivation of the image. And for him, the image needed to be the combination of two very distant, contrary kinds of realities, the bringing together of the two in something that he called surreality, which is not necessarily a liberation, but it was a kind of crisis and a kind of excitement around the creation of something that was new that he called surreality.
The world was going up in flames and it felt like anything could happen. And artistically, filmmakers everywhere were doing extraordinary work. I mean, you see it in every discussion of late 60s and early 70s film, whether it was indie underground, whether it was the beginning of hardcore in pornography, in a sense that, we're not going to hold back. We're going to show every part of sexuality.
Whatever is in front of you in cinema is in front of you in cinema. It's happening. Whatever is in front of you in a dream, when you're dreaming, is happening. It's not like in our dreams we have dry ice and music. We have vivid images that exist in some kind of temporal order. It can be a scrambled temporal order, but it's some kind of order. And it's that quality. So I think that's why cinema does lend itself so well to surrealism, not because it can film dreams, but if you put together the bourgeois life of this young woman who doesn't know how to ask for what she wants, and if you put together her fantasies, which tend toward the masochistic, because again, she doesn't know how to ask for what she wants. And then if you put together the brothel scenes, which leave her kind of newly alive to the world, you put all that together and you have a work of art, not just a case study, that gives you a new dimension of sexual life. That may be the triumph of surrealism in this film, because in a sense you have it both ways, and surrealism wants to have it both ways. It wants to bring together reality and fantasy, dream, reality, all of the oppositions that don't go together. Surrealism wants to find a way to forge into a new kind of reality. And it could be that what Buñuel has pulled off at the end of this film is to have these two endings coincide. They kind of literally coincide in a form of superimposition. When you open on the scene, the final scene in the apartment of Séverine and Pierre, that's kind of a real surrealist image, because they're together at the same time. It's a Freudian condensation. And then similarly in the ending that has Pierre crying and disturbed, she's possibly punished. But in the other ending, which isn't necessarily a happy ending, he stands up and they resume their lives together. And so it's not like one is happy and one is unhappy. They're both kind of, they're merged and they're a mixed bag. And surrealism is not a utopian liberation. It's just a recognition of the oscillations and the mergers of realities.
I don't think it was trite or some kind of stupid dress that he was putting on to make surrealist films. I think that's how he felt and experienced life, and the rest of the world said, why, you're part of the surrealist movement, you're a leader of it. And I'm sure privately he was thinking, but this is just the way life is to me. And all these critics who want to know, but what was the ending, and what did that mean? And, trying to find a literal narrative answer to every mystery in my movie. How can they be so foolish? They're kidding themselves to think that life is so compartmentalized. I'm not going to give you a moral. I refuse. I refuse to give you your moral. Now what are you going to do?
I think the difference between Freudian psychoanalysis and the way surrealism cultivated it was that Freud wanted a cure. The surrealists didn't want any cure. They wanted to exploit this possibility of the unconscious, which was capable of such subversion once you began to see the way it worked, this insidious way that it could link things up. And Freud wanted to understand what your latent desires were. I don't think the surrealists so much wanted to know what the latent desires were in order to expose them and in order to then get rid of them. They wanted to cultivate them and see what they could do creatively with them. And the images that are dreamlike, but if you think about it, are not the images of dreams. They have this way of working through condensation or displacement to combine things that are not normally combined the way our dreams do, but they're not in the interest of expressing what's troubling an individual. That's really not what the surrealists and Buñuel and initially Dali were interested in.
The true surrealist answer to why anybody is anything is there is no why. Stop asking why.